there's been deliberate strides, including what we have done around expanding the use of technology. So now from wherever you are, you can log into a courtroom, participate in proceedings. That's such a game changer.
Indeed.
That's such a game changer. I log into my court and I'm interacting with people who've logged in from Lodwar, logged in from different corners of the country, outside of the country. It used to be that someone would have to buy a ticket, fly in into the country for their court case, only to be told, no, the matter will not be proceeding for XYZ reason. Now you log in at 8:30 from, if you are in Europe, you're in the US, wherever, the matter is handled. You either go to bed or you wake up to the new day and carry on with your business. And Kenyans need to know that this is how our courts are evolving, and for the sole reason that no one should face a hurdle when they are seeking to enforce their rights.
I want to ask a question about a little bit into the nitty-gritty, Judge, because again, when we think about these rights that are yours as a human being, and that are, at least for the most part, enshrined in the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, one would assume then that if it is clear that those rights would have been abrogated, if I am then before a court for whatever reason, that the court is more than likely to adjudicate in my favor, so long as it is clear that something here has been abrogated in line with the Constitution. And not just because I looked a certain way in court that day, or not because I came crying, or not because it seems as if the other person was wielding, whatever it was. But what takes precedent, even when we are talking about something like human rights that are very clear and how they've been set out? We know what that says. What is supreme over the other? The individual and their rights, or the supreme law that we talk about when it comes to now adjudicating these matters?
I don't, maybe I don't understand what you mean by the supreme law.
Supreme law being the Constitution.
Yes.
Where we have human rights enshrined as individuals.
Yes.
Is there one that takes precedent over the other?
Is there a bigger right? Is there a right that is more right?
I wouldn't say so. It should. I mean, if we use, there was a recent decision that I found so exciting. The feeding of children in schools, and people had moved to block that. And they had raised issues about the process, etc.
Exactly.
I mean, what's the accountability of all this?
Yes.
And there were figures to show that this feeding program was benefiting children from disadvantaged homes. Solid meal. And the court said, when we preside over matters concerning children, the rights of the child are paramount. The interests of the child are paramount.
Yes.
And the court was able to say, look, this thing is benefiting children. It is possible to put in place all these things we are talking about, but in the meantime,
do not halt it.
Do not halt it.
Feeding children.
Yes.
Because they have a right to.
Yes, and it was evident that numbers were increasing of children who could survive a whole day in school. That's just one example. Another example is the demolitions we keep talking about in this country. Somebody wakes up and says, this is an illegal settlement or XYZ, whatever. It's true. You are not meant to be on that land. And it is the High Court that said, even when people are illegally on a parcel of land and you need to evict them, there are certain procedures that must be followed for the sake of their dignity. And it is the High Court that said, this is the Mitubel decision, not only are you, like as the government, of course, entitled to ensure that we don't have trespassers on other people's land? But even as you enforce that, give them notice, allow them to move their things, and do it at a decent time. And then the court said, now, we have made this pronouncement, come back to us after 6 months and report to us that you have put those regulations in place. What I find exciting about that decision and what you have raised is that when we are talking about rights, repeatedly what the courts enforce is that there can never be a violation without a remedy. And that's what the courts endeavor to do. If your rights have been infringed, it is the responsibility of the courts to ensure we give you an adequate remedy. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. I'm able to say that this lady who was forced to deliver on the hospital floor does not just need monetary compensation, but actually needs an apology from the hospital. Okay, so that's the kind of latitude, and what I feel is so fulfilling about being part of a process that safeguards rights for Kenyans.
The Honorable Lady Justice Patricia Nyaundi, Judge of the High Court, is our guest today. We are talking about the role of courts in upholding human rights and whether we all feel that the courts are actually doing that job that they've been given by the Constitution to do. Judge, when matters of human rights are brought before court, there's a violator and there's a victim. And it's a power play here. The victim, of course, holding the shorter end of the stick. So do the courts feel that need to support the weaker party here by giving them more latitude and listening to them? And even when matters are brought before you, then you feel that the evidence that has been brought here by the victim does not go full hog in supporting their case, and you could advise them on what to do. Because we know in other cases, judges say, or the judicial officers say, you bring what you've brought. I will deal with what has been brought. If you don't bring the evidence, I can see you need to bring it, but not my forest. In the case of not monkey, in the case of rights, is it different?
Sadly, our system truly is adversarial. But what we've been told is that when we are interpreting the Constitution, we've got to take a liberal and purposive approach. So in many of the decisions that courts give with regards to safeguarding of human rights, and this is what many people then are complaining about, is that the court is always deliberate to seek to expand that right. So whereas in interpretation of the ordinary statute, a judge normally will be encouraged to stick to the black letter of the law. When you are interpreting a constitutional provision, you are encouraged to be as liberal as possible and ask yourself, what was the intention of the framers of this provision when they guarantee to somebody the right to decent housing? What does that entail? It may not be luxurious, but surely it cannot be something that would be blown away or fall apart or expose them to the elements. So that really is the essence of human rights, that you are at every opportunity as a judge when you sit, as you write that judgment, what's at the back of your mind is I must once again pronounce on the essential values of human rights, which is that we are all equal and that we are all entitled to dignity. And that really is what colors, the interpretation of human rights. To what extent this person who has come to me. Look at the decision one time. A mother came and said, why are we discriminating against children by virtue of whether or not they are born within marriage? I mean, how do we do that? Okay? Every child is entitled to identity. Every child is entitled to parental authority, parental support.
Care.
Whether or not their parents are married. But at one time, our laws distinguished between those children born within a marriage and those children whose parents were not married at the time they were born. And we used to call those children illegitimate.
In our laws.
In our laws, that this child is illegitimate. What does it mean when I say you are illegitimate? Illegitimate, an illegitimate human being?
Yes.
Yes.
It's like you're an alien.
Yes. So this is when the courts interpret and say it doesn't matter. You restore the dignity to that child. And that child, when I started my practice, one of the most interesting decisions was, you will remember these children who had HIV, when HIV was a stigma.
Yes.
Actually a matter that Ababu Namwamba handled. And these children were being denied access to a school because they had HIV. They were coming from a home that was known to host HIV orphans. And the court said, you can't do that. You cannot deny a child access to education in a public school because of the fact that they have HIV. So powerful, life-transforming pronouncements like those that remind us the essence of Utu, the essence of why we are. And there have been numerous pronouncements as those. I think the tragedy of what we consume in public, media is what's negative, isn't it? So that's what
we often don't see the positive.
That's the positive, and that's why, as the High Court, we have deliberately said every year, 10th of August,
You want to highlight what's positive.
And the fact that we have at the heart of our constitution these pronouncements on what we as citizens can demand from our leaders and the role that the High Court will play in ensuring that.
Let me give you a case here of something that my colleagues will tell you has become quite dear to me. And this is on the issue of sanitation and access to toilets. I was recently involved in a project with a company called Fresh Life Initiative that is doing toilet projects in the slums. And in the course of doing the work, came to discover that, not discover, but just to realize in the reality of what living in the slums of Nairobi means in terms of accessing a toilet. There's no toilet. It's a pit latrine that you may get, you may not get, depending on where you live. And what that does to the dignity of human beings. You can imagine young girls, women, men who want to use a toilet facility in the morning or at night, and they cannot because there's no toilet available. And then there's the other side, the argument from the government that how do we provide this very expensive infrastructure in this area? How do we connect it? And so on and so forth. A case was brought before the court by Dr. Adrian Kamodo, lawyer. It wasn't about the slums, but it was about the same issue of sanitation. Access to toilet when you're traveling long distance, or whatever distance you're traveling. Do you have toilets by the roadside? And the court said the Minister for Transport ought to ensure that there are toilet facilities by the roadside for travelers. That decision is out. The implementation of it is not out. So the enforcement of such a groundbreaking decision that says it is the job of the government and the road agencies to make sure that people, when they're traveling, they can get access to toilets along the way, right? But it hasn't happened. So, it's a beautiful decision, but what do we do about enforcement of such?
I'd be surprised, because increasingly what courts are doing is that when you render such a decision that requires action by an actor that's not the court, is then you say, come back after 6 months.
Yes.
Come back after 1 year, so that the court follows up and is able to take sanctions. So
the truth is, yes, I think the judgment said the Minister for Transport ought to come back to court and report.
Yes.
And in fact, the last time the minister was supposed to report was Kipchumba Murkomen going to court. The reality on the ground, Judge, is, do you have toilet facilities?
No.
Travel from here to Kisumu. Is there a place that Kenya can tell you that this is a designated stop for passengers to use toilet facilities? However they've done it.
I mean, that's just the tragedy, and the limitation of courts is that we then cannot go into policy. That's the regime of government. And the example you've given of toilets along the road is really the perfect example of how society is stratified. When you and I travel, we will not face that challenge because we'll be stopping at petrol stations, we'll be stopping at restaurants, we'll be stopping at hotels and accessing those toilets, or we'll even be flying. So this, I mean, is just the challenge of the lens through which one views society. So that for the middle class and above, that issue has been resolved by the Shells and these other petrol stations, Totals, along the routes. They have resolved that challenge for us, but not for the people you could say...
Not for the mass travelers.
The bus travelers, those ones that, be told, go to the left, go to the right. And this is truly the crisis of the context in which we operate. One, a culture of impunity that a court can pronounce, and then people decide not to move. I think the one of the things we'll be emphasizing, especially to the other arms of government, is that you cannot support the culture of impunity, because, and history has proved this, is that when you're in a position of influence and you refuse to take action, your inaction is waiting for you further down the road. A story is told of a minister who the prison officers kept saying to him, you need to improve prison conditions. We need to increase the budget. He says, no, we're not sending people there for luxury. He said, just the mattress, food portions. He said, no, people don't go to prison for luxury.
They're criminals. Until
the day he found himself. And when he was welcomed the first night, he said, where's the mattress?
Okay.
He said, but Waziri, this is your policy. This is the directive you gave. When he had to have his first meal, he said, what's the quality of this food? This is not fit for human consumption. I said, but Waziri, you kept saying...
You're not here for luxury.
People are not here for luxury. And he had a dose of his own pronouncement. Just again to reiterate that when you're in a position of influence, and you fail to have your eye on dignity of people, somewhere down further the road, either you or someone close to you will have to deal with your decision. So I think this This is what we are saying about impunity, that as a judiciary is really a bane to what it is we are trying to achieve for this country. When we are making the pronouncements that we do to uphold the Constitution, that sometimes people celebrate when they say, oh, those orders, we will not obey them, that's trash. But we've been proved right over and over again that surely, let's just respect each other, let's just honor each other, because truth be told, as Martin Shikuku always reminded us, regardless of how you cover your clay, some of us cover with very expensive suits, some of us cover our clay very modestly, it is still clay.
Justice,
Yes.
you mentioned sanctions.
Yes.
What are sanctions?
Sanctions are the punitive measures that can be taken to ensure that you comply.
Give us examples.
You can be, and some officers have been compelled to pay personally. So if you've been found not to have performed your duty and you persist, then the court will say pay so much and out of your own pocket, so that it is not a burden on the taxpayer.
If they refuse to pay?
What has been done is you are committed to civil jail. You spend some time.
I like what you've said. See, the crafters of the Constitution, as you very clearly mentioned, had an understanding of what they wanted to see achieved. And you say you are encouraged to always contemplate that as you are going about your business of making a judgment. But did the crafters envision a situation where one arm of the government, which is the executive, are the ones who repeatedly seem to go against the very dictates of these very hallowed ways of doing things? And if they did, let's bring in sanctions into the conversation and let's talk about implementing them.
Yeah, I think the framers of the Constitution, the assumption of the Constitution making is you're dealing with people who have an adequate dose of common sense for survival.
That's the assumption.
That's the assumption that each one of us have adequate common sense. And you're able to say, this decision will facilitate this, so I'll implement it.
And there's no addendum to that particular understanding.
The tragedy is that then many of us actually have a flawed appreciation of what it means to be in a position of influence. Yeah, we assume the trust that's placed on us as Kenyans, the positions of privilege we hold, are to our own benefit, So you get absorbed in your power. That's the only way I can explain it. Because I cannot appreciate how something as fundamental as dignified existence of human beings. Let's go to the example of toilets, the example of housing, access to water, all these things. The courts have, made various pronouncements. Then you look at the allocation of our resources, and it seems, there's a struggle to align how we allocate our resources and how we safeguard the dignity and the promotion of our people. So there's just that disconnect. The court, I believe the courts have used that the heavy hand of the law, and with individual officers there's been successes. But what we must admit that where we are as a country, the problem is almost structural, and that is going to take. We have a whole chapter on national values and principles, on integrity, and that seems to me is going to be a long-term project for many of us to convert to those values. And until we do, then the the law actually is always going to have to be accompanied by a stick to nudge people along. But ideally, we should all... It's really tragic, that we have the document that we have that's meant to guide us as a country. But many of us, we want to look at it that we have to be compelled. You have to be compelled. And it would cost us less than if we all just woke up and
decided to live a certain way.
To do the right things.
So what I sometimes I'm afraid to call them justice partners, but all right. The police service in Kenya a lot of times has been accused of not upholding the rights of man. How do you deal with them? Because at one time, as the judicial process and officers, you depend on the police for certain things. And also here, they have been accused time and time again of not upholding the rights of humans. How do you create the balance between that and urge them to or look into issues like this with proper scrutiny?
Yeah. What has been said of the national police, it used to be the police force. We now talk of them as the police service. And I think in all fairness to the police, we've got to also remember the colonial heritage that burdens them. They were introduced as an arm of the colonial master to put the natives in place, isn't it? So they have that colonial legacy hanging over their heads. But they are also a service under reform. Look at what the Constitution provides, should be their values. I have had opportunity to engage with the police. My sense is that by and large, there are many reformists within that institution. It's also one of those institutions that has struggled with the deviant being more visible than the positive. I'm sure we all remember in 2007 that lasting image of the police officer who calmed down people and said, guys, this is our country. We've seen images of police officers helping, young children who are stranded and helping. So I, for one, would not do a blanket condemnation of the police service, but would be the first one to also say there is lots of room for improvement. And I think we have witnessed those battles in our courtrooms, but I do not think we should sign them off blanket.
No.
It's always the bad ones who rise to the top.
It's the bad ones that we see, but there's lots of police officers who...
It's the bad ones that rise to the top of the leadership.
They bear the brunt of being victims of a system that they're supposed to help set right. And yet they themselves are also victims. Just consider that.
A police boss, at whatever level they are, is no longer a victim. They may have risen, but by the time they're Inspector General or Deputy Inspector General of Police, they're not. It's 9 a.m. Thank you very much, Judge, for joining us. Justice Patricia Nyaundi, Judge of the High Court, has been our guest, talking about courts and upholding human rights. And yes, this is ahead of the conference that will take place on the World Human Rights Day. When is it? 10th of December?
10th of December.
Yes.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.